Welcome to another Talking Feds One-on-One. I'm Harry Littman. There's a spasmodic quality to the 7 months of Trump's presidency. In addition to his moral failings and deep-seated viciousness, Trump has the attention span of a child, and his inconstancy leads him to lurch from one soundbite to another, often leaving substantial wreckage in his wake. Which brings us to, who remembers this one? The Department of Government Efficiency, or Doge, which for a month or so seemed to be the defining initiative of his presidency, or really co-presidency with Elon Musk, who's now MIA. There's a new report from the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, the $21.7 billion blunder, analyzing the waste generated by Doge. It's taken a close look at that ill-fated initiative and come up with a number of shocking revelations of chaos and waste in the billions of dollars. To delve into that report, we're very lucky to have as our guest today Senator Richard Blumenthal. Senator Blumenthal is the senior senator from Connecticut, where he has held his seat since 2011. He's a member of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary, along with many other important assignments. He has also an extensive legal background, having served as a Supreme Court clerk, a U.S. attorney, and 10 years, I think that may have been a record, as his state's attorney general. So not surprisingly, has charted a reputation as one of the most thoughtful and clear-headed members of the Senate. Thank you so much for joining today, Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Thank you so much, Harry. I'm very lucky to be with you and really honored in light of your own extraordinarily distinguished background as a former Supreme Court law clerk and a United States attorney. Not too many of us around.
Not too many, but I don't think I'll continue to hit the heights that you have hit. Okay. So, Senator, you and your colleagues on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations have this report out with some, really shocking revelations about Doge. Let's just, what's the headline finding here?
The headline of this report is tremendous waste of taxpayer money. $22 billion, almost exactly $21.7 billion down the drain. And you will remember the great picture of Elon Musk strutting across the stage with a great big chainsaw, boasting about the savings he was going to achieve. Well, the $2 trillion that he was going to save, actually, even according to their numbers, are only $170 billion. And those numbers are rife with mistakes. Are digging down through the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, using their information, shows that actually there have been losses of taxpayer money because of those firings that have taken place. You remember in many agencies, they had to hire some of them back and pay them for illegal firings. The costs of, in effect, breaking the law are significant.
And I have to imagine not yet fully accounted for. There's going to be more bills to pay for the people who were unlawfully fired. But the thing that really struck me, the number one expense you in the document is paying employees not to work. It seems that maybe 2/3 of the $22 billion were just paying them to do nothing. Kind of ironic, given that the philosophical idea was that government employees were just part of a deep state. How the hell did that happen, that you're actually, wasted so much money to have people do nothing exactly?
As it turns out, a lot of those people who were paid not to work actually were doing things that the federal government is supposed to do, in fact, sometimes legally obligated to do. So when the federal government misses deadlines, because they have told people, don't come to work, we'll pay you, but don't come to work, it actually has tremendous costs. And I think a very important point here for people to understand is the Doge tech bros, many of them in their 20s, went into these agencies without any experience in the federal government. You and I know how the federal government work. So do many others in Congress or elsewhere. But what they did was essentially apply their algorithms. They took certain categories of workers, for example, probationary employees. Well, probationary employees, first of all, are many of the young people who are really enthusiastic, energetic, the future of our federal workforce. But many of them also are people who have just been promoted to new jobs. They are provisional in those jobs. By law, they can't be automatically, permanently put there. So they are probationary, and they were promoted. Guess why? Because they were so good at the jobs they were doing before. They're among our best. So they fired the best of our federal workers because they were using these arbitrary draconian algorithms and formulas, which they justified because they believe tech ought to override the kinds of human values that should go into human resource decisions.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand, they sort of referred to them as low-hanging fruit. And what that meant is legally, it would be easier to lop them off. And as you say, with anyone who, it was done with such insensitivity to what makes the federal government work. I wanted to return to these tech bros because that was the lesson that I really took from it. They're sort of barging in and pushing people aside. But this is a whole, and hopefully we'll have time for it, but this is a whole nother side of things, just the on top of everything else, flushing billions and billions of dollars down the drain. Let me ask you this, Senator, because you mentioned this is through their own numbers. How did you get all the figures? Doge has been very secretive. The administration's very secretive, especially where they have blemishes to reveal. How'd you actually get your hands on the information that is the stuff of the report?
A lot of it was publicly available, Harry. For example, the pay scales of the people they fired and then had to hire back, or people they told not to come to work, or the amounts of money that were lost on warehouses full of food and medical supplies that spoiled when they eliminated AID. You know, they had warehouses full of food that could have benefited people abroad, and they just let them sit there. So that's one of the calculations we did. But it's not like we had to go into classified top secret information. The agencies were uncooperative, but a lot of the information was on government websites. There's a ton of information available to the public if you go there. But I want to point out, and it's the reason why I'm so grateful to you for doing this topic, these Doge workers are still in these federal agencies.
Yes. Well,
they're still there.
Please.
Now, the country has sort of moved on, as you pointed out at the very beginning. Donald Trump not only can't keep a thought in his head for much longer than a child, but he is endlessly ingenious at distracting people. And so a lot of America feels Elon Musk is gone, therefore Doge is gone. But in fact, if you listen to Russell Bode, who is the head of the budget office of the federal government, he believes that these Doge tech bros are going to be continuing in each of the federal agencies as a kind of, as he's put it, efficiency consultant. So they are going to continue to dictate to cabinet secretaries how they should fire or dismantle their departments. Look at the Department of Education, for example, where Linda McMahon is literally dismantling her department under the guidance of those Doge so-called experts. And so Doge may be out of sight, but it is not out of mind or effect in the federal government.
You know, let's follow through with that. And maybe this is something that we don't know and is the subject for a future investigation. But that was sort of the story when Musk left town, is he had 2 or 3 or 4 real loyalists left behind in Doge. Now, what I think people have wondered since is, at the time, you know, as you say, he's got the chainsaw, he's got his hat, and he's dancing with his son. He's a co-president. People were afraid when his acolytes came in. Do we know? So they're still there. They're still making trouble. Do they have the same kind of for lack of a better term, juice to be, really working their will? And aren't they banging heads with just anyone who's trying to do the remaining staff that's just trying to do what they've gotten up and done for years, do the government programs that they've learned to do?
And the answer is, Harry, and it's a great question. Yes, they do have a lot of that juice, the sway, the impact, and the influence. If you look at, for example, the Department of Defense, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, they're still embedded in the Department of Defense. There have been famously chaotic departures from the Defense Department at the highest level in the Office of the Secretary of Defense because of conflicts there. Likewise, in the VA, the Veterans Administration, I'm the ranking member on the VA committee. Initially, the Doge plan, which became Doug Collins' plan, the Secretary of the VA, was to fire 83,000 people, many of them doctors, nurses, psychologists, schedulers, janitors, all part of a team. And when it became clear that they were going to decimate the VA healthcare system, they reduced that number to 30,000. But the Doge acolytes are still there, influencing and sometimes dictating to the Secretary of the VA what should be done. So it varies somewhat from department to department, but they are still very much alive and well as an influence in those departments because they were given such credibility by officials like Russell Vought and White House staff. Again, there was a falling out between Trump and Musk, but the Doge workers are still there.
Which is really harrowing. It always seemed to me the model, even at its sort of most romanticized, was deeply flawed because even if he's a great businessman, the running of the federal government is not like running a business. There are so many different cultural, efficiency, just the whole, to come in so ignorant of it and think you're a CEO always seemed flawed to me. But, even beyond this, so you've pointed out basically all this money flushed down the toilet. In some cases, it seems even worse. So here's a finding that surprised me in the report. $66 million we lost. How? Underutilizing thousands of professional staff to perform entry-level duties for weeks on end, including $138,000 for paying scientists to check guests in at national parks. All right. And when you talk $21 billion, that's chump change. When you talk families going to national parks and, or we found this with the Weather Service or really sort of fundamental government functions that just seemed to have been lopped off and not available to, regular citizens. What's the story behind those kinds of deprivations?
Well, very important point, Harry. NOAA and the Weather Service were cut dramatically. We are approaching the hurricane season when we need to know what the weather is. Likewise, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, just as they began cutting FEMA and hugely dismantling this really important disaster relief agency, the storm struck in West Texas, or at the site where so many children died. And of course, that part of Texas was devastated, and FEMA took much longer to get there, had fewer people to provide relief, had less ability to guarantee federal rebuilding funds. I've been through storms, hurricanes, tornadoes here in Connecticut as a federal official, but also as a state attorney general. And I know firsthand how FEMA helps people on the ground, face to face, giving assurance to homeowners that, yeah, they're going to be okay. To businesses, yeah, you can rebuild. FEMA is a real force, not just for relief, but also rebuilding. And lo and behold, they were dismantling FEMA, saying, oh, the states can take care of disaster relief. So they began hiring back some of the NOAA people. They began retrieving some of the Weather Service people. All of it is costly. Those costs are not even part of our report, by the way, because we finished our report before they began hiring them back, and they're now trying to hire back some of the VA people. So it's kind of a replica of what Elon Musk did at X when it was Twitter. He took it over. He began firing people. There was chaos. And of course, there was rebellion in the ranks, and it became a case study about how not to do a takeover in private enterprise. Well, he applied the same kind of chaos and confusion to the federal government, where it is even more an anathema because, the federal government really thrives on stability, doing the job day in and day out. It's not glamorous. You don't get stock dividends. You don't get the kinds of benefits that you do in private enterprise. There are no free lunches or snack bars that there may be in some of the high-tech firms. People do it, I hate to say this because it sounds a little bit corny, but most of them are really dedicated to getting the mission done. They have made it their life's work, at least a lot of them. And so treating them like dirt is really counterproductive.
Man, no apologies are necessary. This is what you and I saw with our, what I've said again and again to people. You can trust me or not, but I'm telling you, this is why they're here. And that's really the soul of DOJ, certainly. And it's been just completely sullied. And, I don't know if it'll be the same. I hope we can talk about that in a whole nother conversation. But let me just ask, so it's still there, still presumably making mischief, still deeply misunderstanding the people they're dealing with. Super important to turn the spotlight on because, as you say, so many people, that's like 6 crises ago. And he just lurches from one to the other. Any effort afoot? Is there anything other than a turn in the tide in the midterm elections that you think could occasion the forward-looking kind of reform of Doge, or just keep it from being a continuing force for, malevolence?
I'm hopeful, Harry, that the American people will begin to see how costly some of these missteps are. The missteps in tariffs, in eliminating 11 million or more people from Medicaid, cutting nutrition assistance, all of the cuts that were made by the big blatant betrayal. I don't refer to it as the big beautiful bill. Right. And I'm hoping particularly that increased costs of produce, home furnishings, all this stuff that is just beginning to rise and betray the promise that Trump made that he was going to cut costs on day one. In fact, here we are 6 months later, costs have not come down, they're rising. So I hope the impact of the lessening of quality and quantity in federal service as a result of these draconian arbitrary cuts will also persuade people in the midterm elections. But even before then, maybe my Republican colleagues will get some backbone. They know what's happening. They've seen this report. They know it's true. And they simply lack the spine to stand up to Donald Trump. It's happened again and again and again on judicial nominees, on the budget, and now on the wasteful spending from the Doge report. So I'm hoping that maybe we'll have some sanity, but hope is not a strategy.
Right.
We need to win elections going into a year from this November. And that's why I am telling people, again, it may sound trite or corny or oversimplistic, but we need to go to red states as well as blue states. We need good candidates. We need to elevate the arguments. We need to fight and give people hope and encouragement that fighting will win results. And I'm determined that we will fight with everything we have. It may involve, in effect, shutting down the government this fall if we can't be assured that the Doge approach to rescission and impoundment of funding, that is clawing back funding, even though it's been appropriated, will be the ongoing policy. We need to be prepared for battle.
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting brennancenter.org.
This is a really broad theme, of course, but it's you certainly bring it home to Doge in particular, and yes, the sort of indolence or cowardice or whatever of some of your colleagues. It's in addition to the almost, I would say, clownish aspect of some of the actors we saw, it's a broad problem, including the courts. There is one kind of sector that comes out looking pretty good in your report, and that seems maybe still, in there, which is watchdogs inside the federal government. So you were really able to call on them for some important information. Do you want to speak to that for a minute?
That's a very good point. Yes, some of the whistleblowers who came to us, and frankly, some of the inspectors general who are officially watchdogs, the whistleblowers came forward, and I've been a longstanding advocate of providing more protection to whistleblowers. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues who joined in what was a bipartisan effort now have abandoned this cause because of their fealty to Donald Trump, not to the cause of uprooting and eliminating waste and fraud. But if the Trump administration really wanted to eliminate waste, it shouldn't have fired the inspectors general. 17 of them were fired, including Mike Missile at the VA. As you know, now the Department of Justice whistleblower was retained. But that's an exception to the general rule they adopted of firing whistleblowers. They are now trying to dismantle the General Accounting Office. I know this sounds like a technical issue, but the GAO, as you know, does very well-researched, in-depth reports uncovering waste and fraud. They don't want to eliminate waste and fraud. They want to dismantle the federal government. And I think your point about whistleblowers and watchdogs is very, very important because they've been a source of information. We need to provide them more protection.
I think, generally speaking, the hopefully this report's already getting a fair bit of attention. Hopefully, it will get more. The financial figures alone are kind of eye-popping, but as you say, it's just Trump's kind of style. It's about 6 crises ago, and people might think it's in the past, but in addition to the documentation of all the past waste, just the this plague is still upon us is a really important lesson. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about it more, but congrats on doing the report and all the hopefully it'll get the focus and coverage it deserves. We only have a couple minutes, and I just wanted to turn briefly to your and my other point in common, the U.S. attorney background. So what is going on, right? We have several spectacular kind of loyalists that would never have been considered in any previous administration to be put in there, and really seem to be all in some kind of reprisal agenda. But then generally they just haven't, there have been very few confirmations. What's your sense of the sort of political dynamic? Do you anticipate a breakthrough where a number of them are suddenly confirmed, and will the Senate possibly hold the line on a few of the most outrageous in LA and Northern District of New York and DC and New Jersey, et cetera? What's up with actually bringing leadership to the Department of Justice field offices?
You and I have both served as United States attorneys, and not all of the past appointees under both Republican and Democratic administrations have been, Edward Bennett Williams, to take a defense lawyer, legendary, or Clarence Darrow or whatever. But they've been people who were chosen because they had qualifications as trial lawyers and as members of the bar with some experience. What we have right now is just totally unqualified, people who are unfit. Ed Martin proposed to be the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, the biggest U.S. Attorney's office in the whole country out of the 98. These are the chief federal prosecutors in their districts with enormous power to make decisions about indicting or not charging, about beginning investigation. He was defeated, but Jeanine Pirro has been confirmed. The interim U.S. attorneys appointed provisionally in the Northern District of New York and in New Jersey would seem to be destined to go down, but so far Trump has seemingly been sticking with them. In fact, they've invoked a kind of artifice to put them in as the second ranking, so that they can be appointed without a limit on how long they can serve in an interim capacity. They are going through all kinds of manipulation. But here's the bottom line. We still should have a say through what's called the blue slip process, which involves approval by the senators over a U.S. attorney who's going to be appointed in their district. And that's why in New Jersey and New York, I'm hopeful that they will not be confirmed. Jay Clayton, who is the interim U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, I don't know whether he'll be confirmed. He's a former head of the SEC. He has no real trial law experience, but he's at least served in a federal capacity. Long-winded answer to your question. We are going to work on the Judiciary Committee, I'm a member, to make sure that we can do everything possible to sustain the quality. And we're going to fight judges who are unqualified. And there are a lot of them in the works. The Beauvais nomination, we fought. The other district court judge nominations, we have fought so far. And we're going to use every means and tool that we have to make sure that qualifications, experience, and expertise are the measure of who should be appointed, because these judges are the face and voice of justice in the United States. We don't get blue slips over Court of Appeals judges, but we do over the district court judges.
Yeah, and it looks as if Trump is trying very hard to put pressure on Chair of the Committee Grassley to do away with the blue slip process, but it strikes me. I mean, I would have thought that would have been a fool's errand from any other president, but maybe he can cow Grassley. I do just want to say it's such a razor's edge. The very person, one senator who decided not to vote for Martin and doomed his nomination, and at the end of the day decided to vote for Beauvais. So all these, like other things we were sort of talking about, you have these real battles, and then they just pass. And now Judge Beauvais is on the Third Circuit, notwithstanding some really scary allegations of
and I would just point out,
of Justice.
Harry, that they refused us the opportunity to have the main whistleblower who came public as a witness. They refused to hear from other whistleblowers about Beauvais. They refused to have him back to answer questions that he dodged. To refuse that kind of full record and examination is a betrayal of the responsibility of the United States Senate Judiciary Committee.
I think that's right. And it just puts flesh on what you were just saying about, some of this calls for ingenuity. Some of it calls for redoubled determination. Some of it calls for trying to get the public involved. It's that much. And yet there's a certain tyranny of the majority that, makes every battle pretty pitched. Senator, such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for your time and for this report. Again, everyone, it's the $21.7 billion disaster, the backtracking of all the waste and abuse, ironic, of Doge, which was designed to eliminate it. And the sort of chapter and verse of it is really very persuasive and unsettling. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Harry. Honored to be with you. Keep up the great work.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.